Serious, what is the most paranormal or unexplainable events you have witnessed? One day I was with my friends and suddenly my head started getting heavy and my vision began to white out at the point where I couldn't see anything at all. I immediately thought that someone could have drugged me and asked my friends to help me walk to a place where I could get some air and sit down. My sight was coming back but I couldn't speak or express anything, couldn't respond or answer what my friends were asking. Somehow I got into a trance and it felt like I was seeing my surroundings from an above me perspective. My friend called my mom and she picked me up. I still couldn't respond until I got home and went to the bathroom. 3 days later my mom received a call from my grandpa and I immediately knew what was going on. He told her that my dad had passed away and was found dead in his bathroom. I live with my mom and my dad used to live in another state. The forensic report showed that he died in that exact date and probably around the moment I've had that episode. On the day my father died I was alone in the apartment we lived in. While everyone was out mourning at my uncle's, I stayed home because I didn't want people to stare at me sobbing. Anyways, I'm in the living room and I hear footsteps in my mother's room that has a balcony. I straight up hear the balcony door open, so now I'm like sobbing and shouting asking who's there. I go check it out and there's no one there except a strong smell of tobacco in the room. My father used to smoke on the balcony. Never told anyone about it and just kept it for myself. Later learned my mother got blamed for my dad's death, even though they loved each other since they were teens and my dad was simply a victim of cancer, and a massive brawl broke out, so I just thought of it as my dad coming home because he couldn't be bothered to hear people arguing. I was a kid, maybe 10 years old. I came inside in the evening after playing outside in the backyard. I stopped by the exterior door to take my shoes off and just happened to notice that the basement door across the room was closed and dead-bolted. It was an old door that didn't stay totally closed unless dead-bolted. I look down to untie one of my shoes and I hear a loud bang and look up to see the basement door wide open. I noped the fuck out of there with my shoes still on. My parents were in the other room and didn't hear a thing. I went back later and the door/lock were totally undamaged. I have absolutely no idea what caused it and can't really come up with any rational explanation. I was pretty afraid of going in the basement for a while. My stepdad found our puppy Eddie on the side of the road. Someone had thrown him out of a moving car, and he had broken legs, broken teeth, a swollen and closed eye, and was severely dehydrated. My stepdad took him to the vet and paid quite a bit of money for surgeries to get Eddie fixed up. He got attached to the doggo, so we ended up adopting him. After that, even though he was the family dog, he was best buds with my stepdad. Anywhere my stepdad was around the house, you could find Ed tagging along. Eddie and I grew up together. He died while I was in college, and my parents buried him in a pet cemetery. Since it was sort of sudden and I was far away, I didn't get to say goodbye. A few months after that, I had a dream where Eddie comes and find me. His hair is matted and dirty, and his flesh looks kind of rotted, but he's wagging his tail and seems really happy to see me again. Eddie starts leading me down a hazy path, and the farther we go, the faster his tail wags. Finally, we get to this giant wall of mist that extends across the entire horizon and rises higher than I can see. Eddie gets real close to it before trotting back to me. He licks my hand, gives me a couple of nose boops and whines a little. Then he turns around again and starts to do that happy dog prance toward the wall until he finally passes through it. I can sort of see his outline jumping up and down excitedly next to a human-shaped figure. I jog after Eddie and reach my hand out to touch the wall, hoping I'll be able to pass through it, too. That's when my cell phone rings in real life, waking me up. When I answer it, my mom is on the other end crying. My stepdad had just died of a heart attack. About 5 years ago my husband and I went to visit his grandma. Big, beautiful 2-story house. I was going to head upstairs to put some pajamas on and saw a woman walk across the top of the stairs. It was only my husband, young daughter and his grandma in the house, and whoever I saw wasn't Granny. I went in the living room and told them what I saw, and his grandma goes, "Yeah, that's Laurie. She visits a lot." Laurie was my husband's mom who died when he was 11. I was so fucking spooked after that I barely slept the rest of the time we were there. I have one. It must have been some kind of hallucination, but it really scared me. I was sitting in my bed watching YouTube for a couple hours. I got up and reached forward to set something on my nightstand or whatever. I had this strange undescribable feeling that I hadn't actually moved from where I was sitting at all. I quickly turned around and looked at where I was sitting seconds before, and there I was, still sitting there. I was outside my body. I could see the shocked, horrified expression come to my face at such a strange sight. I quickly sat back down right in the same spot and nothing strange happened again. When I was in high school, my younger brother and I shared a bedroom. His bed was on one side of the room and mine was on the other. My brother was an avid sleepwalker and would also talk in his sleep all of the time. Sharing a bedroom with him, it was unsettling at first, but I eventually got used to it. One night, it's about 3 a.m. and I suddenly wake up from a deep sleep, instantly alert. I had this urge to look towards my brother's bed. I felt a presence in the room. When I turned my head, I saw a tall, skinny shadow/human-like figure, and it was reaching its hand down towards my sleeping brother's face. Its hand got maybe an inch away before its head jerked to the side and looked at me, staring at it, frozen. The shadow then faded and moved up into the air, vanishing through the ceiling. Immediately, my brother shot up out of his bed, stood, and walked to the light switch. He turned it on and looked at me. In a very calm and solemn voice, he says, "Did you feel it? Did you feel the hand?" He then turned off the light and went back to his bed. I hid under my covers the rest of the night. My brother doesn't remember any of it. I work with donated human tissue. We process stuff like bones, tendons, and skin for transplant. The controlled work area that we process the tissue in, definitely has weird things happen in it. Small stuff like repeated or inexplicable equipment failure, tools falling off flat surfaces, and sometimes the tissue itself will react strangely to processing, i.e. a young donor whose tissue will fall apart or exhibit other poor disposition for one reason or another. Sometimes a donor will have so many problems befall their processing, that it just feels like they did not want their former body parts to be transplanted. I have definitely got strange vibes while working. I'm not saying that they are knowingly or purposefully haunting us, but there is an energy that is hard to deny. Mine's not crazy scary, but it is true. I was in the living room with my grandma, we were the only ones home. She was working on a crossword puzzle, and I was messing around on my iPad. TV was off, windows were closed. All of a sudden, clear as day, I hear my name being whispered, but since it was so quiet it sounded loud. I looked up to my grandma, thinking it was her, asking her if she said something. She said no, but I heard your name. I have a couple. The first one was when my ex died. I had a 4-month-old daughter with him at the time, but we didn't live together. The night he died, I heard someone walking into the bedroom where my daughter was and very clearly heard his voice talking to her. I called out, thinking he may have came in through the back, but no one answered. I found out the next day he died sometime during the night, probably around the time I heard the voice. The second one happened at the last place I lived. It's nothing terribly spooky, but I rented a townhouse and figured out that in my daughter's room there was attic access. I was stoked because that meant I could probably store my Christmas decorations up there. I get her kitchen chair to open it up and I couldn't. Not physically it was easy to open. Something mental stopped me from doing it. I had a huge fear. So I left it alone. Sometimes I'd get really eerie feelings, but I chalked it up to it being the first place I've lived in alone in a while, 2 years at that point, but I don't get those feelings in my new apartment at all. I found out from my neighbor not too long after the attic incident that the guy who lived there before me was a raging alcoholic and hung himself in the house. In my daughter's room. The one with the attic access. Was reading through and there's some scary shit in here, so I got a wholesome one. My grandmother struggled with dementia for many years before she passed, and I didn't spend as much time with her as I would have liked. I felt really guilty about it the whole day after I heard what happened. That night I had a dream in which my grandmother was standing in a beautiful golden wheat field with a path through it. She said, "Everything's okay, sweetheart." I woke up with tears in my eyes and the feeling that everything was fine. A few years ago, about a year after we moved into our house, my mom and I were home alone with our dog. I was in one bedroom and my mom was in another right across the hall. I heard my dog's toy squeaking down at the end of the hall, so I figured she was playing with it, no big deal. Then my dog came running into the bedroom, without a toy, but the squeaking continued. My dog was running around like crazy, in and out of the bedrooms as if she was trying to figure out where the squeaking was coming from. I figured my mom was teasing her, trying to get her to play. It continued for a few minutes and my dog was getting crazier and crazier until my mom called across the hall for me to stop squeaking the damn toy, you're making the dog crazy. So I stepped into the hallway and said, "I don't have the toy, I thought you were squeaking it." At this point the squeaking had stopped, and we were both freaked out, standing right next to each other with the dog sitting between us. We looked down the hallway and the toy was sitting there, nothing touching it. Suddenly it started squeaking like crazy, as if someone were jumping up and down on it. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up and I was frozen in place. My mom almost started crying. The energy was just so weird, I can't even explain it. Turns out the previous owners had a dog that died in the house, and they told my parents that the ghost of the dog comes around from time to time. Now, I've always been iffy about the existence of ghosts, but I swear that ghost dog was playing with my dog's toy. I'll bring out this story again. It happened to me 7 years ago and I can't figure it out, but I lost an hour of time in what felt to me like minutes. At the time I was working from home after a serious illness diagnosis. I had settled into a routine, up at 7 a.m. and do house stuff and shower, then at 8 a.m. start prepping my work and laying out my day. Phone calls and emails from 8 to 9. This is all I remember. It was 7:55 and I brewed a cup of Keurig coffee on my kitchen located on the main floor of my house. I went upstairs to my office and turned on my computer to settle in and realized I forgot the coffee in the kitchen. I went back downstairs and got the coffee as soon as I realized I forgot it. Couldn't have been more than the time it took Windows to boot up, but I took a sip and the coffee was cold. Not warm, but actually cold. I thought my Keurig was broke, but I looked at the clock and it said 9:14. So whereas I expected it to be 8:05 max, somehow an hour and 10 minutes passed without explanation. It was very bothersome. I have no idea where that hour went. I have never had any blackout before or since. No seizures, and the meds I was on shouldn't have caused a lapse like that. I don't think I fell asleep because I distinctly remember typing my password and saying out loud, "Shit, I forgot the coffee." It kinda left me uneasy a bit. Nothing like had ever happened to me before or since. After my dad passed away, my stepmom kept asking me if I found the book he was reading in his last months. She didn't know the title. We looked all over the house for it. Eventually found it with a stack of magazines, definitely not where it belonged in the house. My stepmom recognized it immediately when found. The title of the book was Hello from Heaven. I also received a phone call 2 days after he passed away. The phone call was from his phone number. For some reason I was too scared to answer. Asked the only person who had the phone, stepmom, if she had called from it. She said she left it in the garage where he always worked. This was 14 years ago. I still regret not answering the phone. When I was 13, I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange man's voice. I couldn't understand what he was saying because he was talking really fast, but at one point I heard it say my brother's name and then it started laughing maniacally. My dad heard it too and came running into my room and turned the lights on. No one was there. Absolutely no explanation. Another time, I woke up in the middle of the night and I heard what sounded like a cult gathering right outside my window. It was like 3 a.m. and I could just very clearly hear a group of people singing/chanting while a baby wailed. After about 10 to 20 minutes, it suddenly stopped. My daughter's school prom. We had brought a beautiful gown and shoes and they were hanging safely in her wardrobe. The evening of the prom she went upstairs to get ready and shouts down to me, "Thanks for getting everything ready for me, Mum." Well, I hadn't been in her room at all. When I went up to see what she was talking about, I found her dress laying on the bed, her shoes next to her dresser and perfume on her dresser. I didn't say anything so she wouldn't freak out, but I spooked me. After that there were other instances like a certain perfume appearing on her dresser, wardrobe doors closing by themselves, etc. After a while we got used to it and would just say thank you when anything happened. Damn it, I'm just about to go to sleep and I do not want to type this story. But it's too good to pass. It happened to 4 different people, in 2 separate occasions. The first one was 8 years ago. I had a roommate who we'll call Karen. I worked in a store not far from our apartment. She texts me while I'm at work, and said, "Hey, can you please open the door, I don't have my keys." I answered, "Sorry Karen, the first can't, I'm at work." Here I can hear your voice in the apartment. I was super confused, so I sent her a selfie, snap of me at work, with a confused look. She could hear me talking. The apartment had paper walls so she could actually make out what I was saying. A few minutes later her boyfriend arrived, he heard me too, and as soon as they put the key in the door, the voice stopped. Few weeks later, my then best friend and I come back from a bar, or a concert, I don't remember which. We enter my apartment building, and I hear Karen's voice through the door. She had a very loud voice. I look at my friend and unlike her looks like Karen's home. I put the key in the door, voice stopped. I get inside, there's no one there. My best friend had heard Karen too, mind you. Clear as day, so there's no way I could have imagined it. I'm late, I'm going to get buried. But I'll share something I experienced from ages around 9 to 12 or so. I used to live in a house that was built on old farmland. I slept in a bedroom that had no door, except for the door leading up to the attic, which had a little sliding lock on it. Every single night, I'd close the door and lock it. The attic frequently had birds and such get into it, and I didn't feel like having them fly out. Except, every single morning, it'd be unlocked and slightly ajar. During the night, I'd wake up and have sleep paralysis. It was pretty frequent, and I got used to it. During said sleep paralysis, a figure would open up the closet and slip out. All black, sort of shadowy and wearing what I can only describe as a farmer's hat. It'd stare at me for a moment, just stare. Sometimes it'd take a step over before turning and walking out the entrance to my bedroom, which lacked a door, but I had set up some beads. They'd knock together. I can still hear it to this day. I had always been told I had an overactive imagination. I never spoke of it to my parents or family since they'd probably make fun of it. One summer, my cousin came to visit. She took over my room, since my family thought she deserved a larger room for whatever reason. She came down for breakfast in the morning white as a sheet and said I could have my room back. When my mother asked why, she told her she had sleep paralysis and saw basically what I had. I had never spoken to her of this. Years later, once we had moved out of the house, my mother told me something. Her bedroom was on the same hallway as mine, and she always slept with the door open. She told me some nights she'd wake up, just to see a figure pass by the bedroom quickly. She stopped getting up to check it after the first few times, but the house always gave her the creeps. I don't really know if it was a shared delusion or what, but it still scares me a bit to this day. I used to live in a town that was pretty strange altogether, but the house was even more so. Most of my elder family that grew up there have also had weird experiences. I remember one time, I got up to use the toilet, the bathroom was next door, which was across the way from my bedroom, and I shit you not, a woman in a full vintage nurse's outfit came running out of the bathroom with a washcloth and into my bedroom. I have no idea if there used to be a poorly person accommodating it years ago, but the house was very old. That is the good side of it though, there's a lot more. You'd even sit there sometimes and have this awful feeling of a bad presence. As if somebody was staring at you, eyes burning into your soul kind of feeling, you know? Freaky stuff. Unsure if it's a haunted house or more of something becoming attached to me. Not long after I met my current boyfriend, I would spend the night at his house. Normally I fall asleep as soon as I hit the pillow, but at his house I would be awake super late feeling creeped out. I blamed it on being in a strange house. After a while I used to fall asleep at a decent time, but I would wake up 2 to 3 a.m. and try to let my eyes adjust to the darkness. Small town equals very little light pollution. Once I would adjust, I felt like I could see a little boy on top of the grandfather clock. This would happen every night for a while. I never felt scared, just confused. It looked like a boy wearing older style pajamas kicking his legs on top of the clock. Still, I would blame it on sleep paralysis / dreaming or my imagination. When I would go back to my parents' house for the school nights, I would start waking up in the middle of the night seeing the same apparition sitting on the dresser or ledge in my room. I slept alone in the basement of the house. After months of seeing the little boy, I wanted to sleep upstairs again, as I figured my mind was just getting to me. One evening I was home alone as my brother and parents were gone to some appointment. I happened to fall asleep on the couch in the living room, only to dream that the little boy was knocking down my mom's ornaments that were on the coffee table. I woke up in a cold sweat and looked at the table. Sure enough, the ornaments were broken. Of course they could have been broken beforehand and I never noticed. It started to get chilly in the living room, so I moved to my mother's bedroom to watch TV before they came home. In her bedroom I kept seeing stuff out of the corner of my eye that looked like the little boy but never really had a full-on view. At this point I was sure it wasn't sleep paralysis / dreaming, because I could move when I woke up and sometimes I would be wide awake. I fell asleep in my mom's bed and woke up to the little boy laughing and running in the closet. Friday of that week I went to my boyfriend's house and he knew something was up, but I wouldn't tell him out of fear that he would think I was crazy. That night I was helping his mom bake and I happened to mention that I was having really weird dreams about a little boy, and she asked me if he was a young one with his jammies on. She knew what I was talking about. She told me that their house was pretty old and all throughout the time they lived there strange stuff would happen, such as stuff being moved or hearing voices or laughter, but the past 6 to 8 months things had stopped happening. It's been 3 years and I've moved out with my boyfriend to start post-secondary. Still seeing / sensing / dealing with whatever it is. Things being moved / voices. After my mother died I went to her grave a few times a week. I usually had my kids with me, and this one day as we passed all the older cemeteries, my eldest son, who was 6 at the time, asked Mom, "What are all those people waiting for? Why are they just standing there?" The cemetery was empty and not a single human was there. When we got to my mom's grave he held my hand and said, "Don't worry, Grandma is with Mom and they are happy." Mom was my mother's sister who passed away before my husband and I were even married. My son knew nothing of her or what we called her. He also would tell us when someone had died in a house. I don't remember this, but my mother always tells me this story. Before I was born, my grandpa had a dream that he was playing soccer with me. My grandpa had brain cancer and was already in hospital. After I was born he met me for the first and last time. Again, he told my mother again about his dream. 2 weeks later he passed away. When I was 2 years old, I was in a club with my parents. It was lunchtime, so my mother asked the nanny to get me for lunch. She comes back and says, "He said he won't come." He said that he is busy. My mother, busy? Doing what? Nanny, playing soccer with his grandpa. Immediately my mother looks over the balcony, the soccer field, and one of the goals was right beneath it. She sees me kicking the ball into the goal and screaming, "Catch it, Grandpa, catch it." She cried so much, and still does every time she tells me this story. I've had a few experiences, but the most confirmed that I have is when my ex, myself and a friend got an apartment together. She would ask if we used her private bathroom, which we never did. But she said she would come home and her mats in her bathroom would be thrown all over. Then later on she was woken up by a voice that said, "Look over here," and she did, and saw her keys jingling by the door. She said she rolled over to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't there. She moved out shortly after that, so the room was empty. Afterwards, my ex and I saw/heard weird things from that room. One time I was in the living room and heard the shower curtain slide open, the door close on its own, heard movement that shouldn't be there. My ex started using the closet in that room to get changed while I was sleeping, since he had to be up at 3 a.m. He said one morning he went to get his uniform and his clothes moved around before he touched any of them. After all of this, a friend and I hung out in the room with a recording device trying to do ghost hunter shit. We did capture some noise from the bathroom, but the only voice recorded that wasn't ours said, "Shut the door."